So hello everybody. It's good to be doing this. We've been trying to do something, God, since about February, I think, haven't we? Yeah. So yeah, it's good to be doing something for you at last, and it's lovely to be working for and with you, because I've been up to your space as well. I've been there and made a mallet, which was fantastic. And I'm really, yeah, I don't know enough about woodwork and making things. I'm kind of practical, but I kind of hack it and smack it together. So it was really nice to come and learn some proper techniques from you, and it's something I want to do more with. So shall I kind of studios in Riverside in Cardiff. I was born in Caerphilly, actually. I'm a Caerphilly girl, but I've lived in Cardiff most of my life. And my studio's in a little place called Tudor Lane. And Tim Rich, who was on here the other day, is my neighbour, just down for 5 doors down from me. And it's a nice little collection of artisans working down here in the back streets of Cardiff. And it's the old tram shed stables buildings. So it's quite a historical part of Cardiff, which I like. I'd much rather be in a shack on top of a mountain somewhere. And whenever I can, I get out and ride around the hills. So I mountain bike, I cycle, and that's how I gather a lot of my images and my materials. So most of my work has been through foraging and finding natural materials. I'm moving more now into actually growing specific plants that are known for their dye quality. So working with community organisations and garden community gardens to have dye plants within that setting, so that people that are gardening can also look at, like you say, adding value and getting other things out of the materials that might be grown that maybe you don't think of as being useful, like nettles and dandelion roots and things like that. So there's a lot out there that we could all be using rather than using synthetic colours. So yeah, little studio space. It's quite small. It's packed, especially at the moment, packed full of stuff. Lots of fabrics. So I very rarely buy fabrics, hardly ever actually. All the fabrics that I use are recycled, mostly old table linen, old blankets, things like that. So I sort of scour charity shops, and people give me a lot of stuff. People know that I collect fabrics, and I try and pass those on as well. So if anybody's got any sort of project that needs fabric, never go and buy anything new. Please come to me first and ask me if I've got something that you can use. The only fabric I do tend to buy is silk occasionally, and I buy hemp from Romania for specific projects. And hemp is wonder plant, and I urge you all to start buying hemp clothing rather than cotton clothing, please. So this is my little studio. I've got a print table, so I do printed textiles, dyed textiles, certain products, and then sort of specific custom things for maybe TV, film, different clients that want something specific done. I will use synthetic colours if I need to, so I have a supply of synthetic dye here as well, but I just try and use it as little as possible and waste as little as possible. So all synthetic colours come from the mineral oil industry, so that's what they're made of. They're made of oil, and so the idea is to stop using them, really, apart from, very minimal things.
There's a massive sustainable ethos to the work that you're doing there.
Yeah, it's all about sustainability and using as little new products as possible and sourcing as locally as possible. So I'd love to be able to buy British hemp, but that's not possible at the moment. So that's why I get Romanian rather than Chinese, because it's a little bit closer. And I sort of know where it's coming from. So provenance is something that I started looking at during my master's, which was 10 years ago. So 10 years after I did my textile degree, I went back and did a master's in fine art. And that became all about provenance and sustainability, knowing where things come from, knowing what's gone into how something's made. So process is really important to me, understanding process, sort of empiricism. So really knowing what something's made of, how it works, where it comes from. And part of that master's, I wanted to do printing, but I suddenly became aware that I had to buy into the ink printing industry if I wanted to do printing, particularly inkjet printers, because I was looking at large format digital printing, and I could feed secondhand fabrics through. I could look at making my own paper, but ink wise, you couldn't touch the ink. You know, they were sort of sacrosanct. The people who run the machines wouldn't let me play around with what products were going through the ink. So the inkjet. So I started having a look at what is ink and where does it come from and what it's made of. And that led me down the route of making 5 black inks, which I could gather from natural sources, which were hawthorn, oak, vine, ivory and lamp. So I started off making 5 different black inks. And the most ancient and traditional one of those is the oak gall ink, also known as gallitannic ink, which is the ink that's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. And did the Magna Carta, the Mappa Mundi, Declaration of Independence, the official post office ink. It's all made was all made from little oak galls. And so the journey of that fascinated me, and my one MA show exhibition was particularly about that, how the oak gall wasp lays an egg and then you get these galls growing, how it has gum arabic, which comes from Africa, ferrous sulfate, which is vitriol. So trying to create all these chemicals myself by just means that I, you know, the things that I could gather. So things such, so I'll show you some oak galls. So these are oak galls. That's a cinnamon stick, sorry. And they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, including, so these I found in Portugal on the side of a cycle track. So you can see the size of those. And then these are little Avon Valley Welsh oak galls. I collect a lot from up around Merthyr and up in the Avon Valley. They seem to like hardy little tough trees on the side of mountains. You tend to not find so many in big healthy oak trees, but then that could be because you just can't see them because they're just too high up for you to be able to find them. But I've just found that a couple of really good sources on unhealthy looking little oak trees, but they seem to like tough weather up in the mountains. So that's the gall, and you can see, if I bring it right up to the camera, let me find a good one. You can see where the face it the right way. Can you see that? Can you see the little holes?
Yeah.
So that's where the wasp, that's the gall, and that's where the wasp has left it. So now is a good time to go out and gather them, because the trees are almost bare and the wasps won't be living in there at the moment. So it's a good time to go and look for some and collect some. That's that one that's been opened up. So it's just a kind of dry, I can actually split it on camera for you. It's kind of quite, it's almost like cork, and this is from a cork oak, actually, Portuguese cork oak. And quite powdery, and that's essentially sort of neat gallitannic acid in there, and that's where the word tannin comes from. So to tan a hide, that would have been done with oak gall liquid. And what gallitannic acid does is react very, very quickly and easily with cellulose fibers. So cotton, fabric, linen, hemp are all plant material, the same as a tree is plant material, and that tannic acid reacts really well with those cellulose fibers and sticks to it, which is why it makes a good ink and is used a lot in dyeing processes. So I've sort of gone on to where I was going next with that, but that's kind of where I started in this fascination of being able to make my own product. It's been quite hard to find a lot of history of dyeing within Wales compared to Scotland with their tartans. Traditional Welsh fabrics seem to be quite a lot quieter, duller, not a huge amount of dyeing going on. It like really quite far back, a few hundred years back, and it would have been mostly tannins. And then a long time ago, we would have been using woad, which gives us blue. But the history of that, it tends to be in the east of England, around Norfolk area, and not so much in Wales. So it would have been quite gentle, subtle plants. Weld is one that we would have used, which is a yellow dye, and that plant grows very easily here. Madder is another one we would have used, and I've got all these to show you afterwards. So madder, you use the root of madder, and that gives you pinky red colours. Not so much for dyeing wood, these would have been used for dyeing cloth. The woad industry died out when synthetic, in Chinese and Indian indigo started to come over to this country, and that wiped out our weld industry. And then synthetic indigo was developed, and other synthetic dyes were developed sort of about 100, 120 years ago. And those just kind of completely overtook natural dyes. And it's really just a kind of craft industry these days. There's not a huge amount of it, although it is increasing. But it's more time. It's sort of time consuming. It's much more time consuming and more difficult to get exact colours, because each plant will be different. Each piece of cloth will be different. Temperature, water. There's a lot of chemical, different chemical reactions that take place. So acid and alkali will affect how the colour works. So it's definitely less predictable than using synthetic dyes, but that means it's a lot more fun. So whenever I take on a job, I very rarely, you know, I won't guarantee that I can match from one batch to another, because you can't just weigh it and get exactly the same colour, the same as you can with something synthetic. So it's about playing, really, playing and having fun with things and seeing what you can get out of them. And you can't really go wrong. You're not going to do anything. You're not going to blow anything up. You're not going to do anything bad. I would say some of them you don't want to eat, probably. And you don't want to do your first test on a really important piece of work. So test and play to know what you're doing before you go on to something important.
So there's a kind of chemistry element in this, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. I wish I'd done more chemistry at school. I don't really know the proper science behind everything. I just know that certain things have an effect and certain things work. I'll show you. I will show you something really quickly before we go on to the two wood dyes. So in here, you can't see because it looks really kind of dark, but in here is logwood. And logwood comes from tropics, South America. I don't really use it very much. I try not to import things. And I know it is part of the logging industry, you know, it's part of deforestation. So where I buy from, they claim it's an ethical source. Obviously, it's difficult to know. So this is logwood. Now, if I just put that onto that piece of paper there, doesn't look very exciting. Not that exciting. If I add, I'm just putting that into that little saucer. I'm going to add a little bit of alkali, sorry, I'm getting this wrong now. See, I can't even remember which one it is. So this is soda ash, it's an alkali. And I'm just going to add a touch of that. And I don't know if you can see that yet.
Yeah.
Can you see what's happened to that colour?
Wow. Yeah, yeah.
Quite amazing.
Very red,
a little bit of alkali, and you've got this incredible purple colour. And logwood is a really traditional old dye that would have been used. So lots of the carpets from Eastern Europe, you know, and Turkey and places that you see, and India would have used logwood. And it changes. You can actually get really quite bright reds with it, as well as these beautiful purples. And if you add a little bit of, it's beautiful, isn't it? If you add, and I've just been putting it on some wood there, if you add a little bit of iron to that, so I've got ferrous sulfate here, a little bit of iron. Can you see what's happened to that? Really dark, pinky, bluey.
Lean it forward a little bit more, Kath. That's it. Wow.
So you've got,
and what colour? It's looking very dark. Is it kind of black?
It's really inky, bluey, purpley black with a little bit of iron. So I use iron quite a lot in my work, and iron reacts with tannins in plants. Actually, that's lovely now. Can you see it going? That's really nice. This is what I like to do. Just kind of drop things on paper or any substrate really, and see what chemical reactions happen, and try and keep a note of them. So, you know, if you want that color, you need to add some soda to logwood or some, you know, so acids, alkalis, irons, and I use other things like, so I make my own kind of copper oxide as well. So that's something I use. That's just using old copper pipes and vinegar, and then I make my own rust water. So in there is a pile of rusty material. There's just bits and pieces with some vinegar and water, so that it reacts with the oxygen. So you get oxidized iron essentially, and that is one of the chemicals that I add to change color. should react as if a bit like as if you're putting it onto cotton or linen, so something cellulose, because that's what the makeup of this is. But this also will have some tannins in it. So what I want to find out and play around with more is whether you can actually just put iron. It'd be good to know if anybody's done this, whether you can just put the iron onto some wood that is high in tannin, and that iron will just react with it so that you can create patterns and add things to it with just iron. Now I've painted some iron onto this little bit here. It hasn't done a lot. This is a piece of your beach, which I meant to have made something with, but I haven't yet.
You have. You're demonstrating very nicely.
Now. I haven't got iron working on its own yet. But yeah, essentially it should be like putting it onto a piece of natural linen. So this is the logwood on the end here that I've just put on. What you need to do is add things and then leave them, because it will react with whatever chemicals are in that wood naturally, and that could alter the colour. So doing little test sample pieces like this with things first to see what happens on the different woods. I started when we started talking about this project, I did that little piece, which is I don't know if I can see what that is. You can probably just tell knowing you. Do you know what that is? It might be lime. It might be.
If you turn it around again, please, Kath, and hold it. Hold it there. Yeah, that's ash.
I thought it might be ash. Okay, so about 8 months ago, on this piece of ash, I just played around with a couple. This is the indigo ink that I make, which is indigo and some tannin.
Yeah.
I can't remember what that one is. That one, the yellow one, is weld. The pink one is madder. Whatever that one was has disappeared. So that was done about 9 months ago, something like that.
Yeah.
I've got others actually, which I've written on. So you can see that they're not disappearing. They're not massively strong, but I just use the inks that I normally make. So it could be that I need to make them a bit stronger. The pink, the madder's lovely actually. And that hasn't had any finish on it. And it's just been left in the open air. It hasn't been in a dark situation or anything. So, you know, those have held fairly well for a good sort of 9 months. Yeah, so where are we? Is that sort of background? Do you want me to?
No, I mean, from a timber perspective, and you mentioned that the reaction with certain timbers, especially if you've got alkaline and that on it. So oak is very acidic, and so is chestnut.
So they've got tannic acid.
So those exactly, they're both the most durable timbers that we have in Britain because of the tannin in them. And you were asking about iron, and when you're working with oak, if you're doing oak frame buildings, and it tends to be green oak that you start with, then if you're putting any metalwork into the oak, it always has to be stainless steel. Otherwise, it reacts because of the iron. And what you end with, once you work on an oak frame building, is there's a lot of blue spots all over the oak as it's drying out. And what it is the machines that you've used on it, your circular saws and your various blades,
little
specks of the iron come out, and you have all these bluey dots everywhere, and it kind of darkens as well. So you go over that. Once you've built the structure and you're almost finished, use oxalic acid to clean up and whiten it all off.
I was going to tell you something.
So so that's what I know as a carpenter.
That's really interesting.
How timber reacts with oak and chestnut. Yeah.
So you could be playing with that and actually banding things or wrapping things. So you could use things like wire wool, but just like steel wire. And if you wrap that around the timber and immerse it in some just white vinegar, lemon juice, something acidic, and keep it a little bit damp, you'll get that black reaction. So it's kind of just actually using metal and placing objects onto the wood. So I often use old brackets, old keys, bits and pieces of metalwork that have come from buildings, and leave those soaking on paper or wood with something acidic, and you'll get and some weight, and you'll get an impression of that object onto the wood. So you could be placing keys, for instance, on a piece of wood. This would be great for like key hanging things and stuff. You could be putting old iron keys on. You'll be keeping it damp, spraying it with vinegar and water, putting some cling film over it, leave it for about 2 or 3 days with some weight, and you'll have an impression of that object on the wood. I imagine. I haven't done it yet, but we will.
Right, that's an experiment for us to do now.
Yeah. And the other thing can I just say about oxalic acid? Oxalic acid comes from rhubarb leaves. So I make my own oxalic acid by just a couple of rhubarb leaves chopped up finely, boiling water, put on them and leave them in a jar soaking. And that liquid that you get from that is oxalic acid. And that's used as a mordant in dyeing. So a mordant is something that sticks to your substrate, and then the dye sticks to that. So it's kind of a link. So some dyes don't naturally have an affinity to a cloth. So you use a mordant, which is like a link between the cloth and the dye, and it brings those two together. So oxalic acid is one of those, along with gallic acid. So what I want to do is show you 2 wood products, particularly, that I use a lot, and that's the oak galls. So I'm going to go through the process of how you extract the colour from those and how you can alter that colour to make an ink, which could be then used to stain your timber, but you're also making it with the oak galls themselves. And then the other one I'm going to show you, hang on a sec, I've got to get up. And the second one I'm going to go through with you is walnut. So I use walnuts a lot. So that was a kind of an accident. I came across walnuts after I'd done the 5 inks. I hadn't really realised about them. And then I read about them and started using them. A friend gave me a bag full, and now I kind of hunt for walnuts wherever I go. So that's a fresh walnut. That came out of my freezer this morning because I keep them in my freezer. So I'm going to show you how I extract the colour from those after. So they're sitting in there defrosting at the moment. They'll be ready, well, they are ready now. So we'll be doing those second. And I will show you lots of samples to do with those after. So going back to oaks. So the oak tree, I don't just use the oak galls. So you've got the oak galls, first of all, which you kind of hunt for and find. You can actually buy them online. And the best ones are meant to come from Aleppo, from Syria. So Eastern Europe as well, particularly, lots of galls come from there. But like I said, I try and collect mine locally. So you've got the oak gall. Then you can also use as a dye the bark and the leaves and the acorns and the roots. So every bit of it will work. The whole tree will work. The bark takes a lot longer. You have to soak it. I don't use it very much. I've got some jars of it soaking up in there. The leaves I tend to use for what's called eco printing. So there's sort of 2 different ways of getting botanical prints, which is a print directly from a plant. The one is that you wrap it between your material. You have close contact with your material and you apply steam and pressure, and that forces the colour out of those leaves and onto a piece of material, or a piece of cloth generally, or paper. It can also be paper. So these are pieces. That's a piece there that has had a few different leaves. So the fabric has been wrapped up with some cloth. And there's another little piece there.
Yeah.
And what have I got? That one has been done with sloe leaves, I think. So all different types of plant leaves and stems and flower petals. You kind of make like a bundle, almost like a lasagna sort of thing. And you stuff your leaves and things into cloth, wrap it up, steam it, leave it for a day or so, unwrap it, and you've got a direct print from that plant material. Oh, there's a nice one here, actually. So that one's, the top print there is from a walnut leaf.
That's lovely.
I'm going to show you that board after, because that's all walnut. Yes, that's one way of getting colour from a leaf. You don't get much dye colour from the leaves, but with that direct contact print you do. The other thing that you can do is called hapazomi, which is where you actually hammer the leaf, you bash it, and literally hit the colour out of it onto your substrate. And I will show you that afterwards, but it's really noisy and everything kind of moves. So I'm not going to show it to you right now. But essentially you have a fresh leaf. Whoop, this is an indigo leaf. And you put it between some cloth. It's not the best print, this. Oh, hang on, there's a nicer one there. And you literally hammer it. And can you see how thin that is? So that one's been done. So basically all the colour has kind of been hammered out of it. And it's gone on to the cloth. So that's the only way really you get a green dye from a leaf. Green is very difficult to get, surprisingly.
And does it stay?
That stays.
Does it stay?
Yeah, that'll stay. So you could put a stain over it. So it's and I will show you afterwards. So it's a really quick way. If you wanted to just have some leaves patterning something, just use the actual leaf. Obviously more difficult at this time of year. And the leaves that are evergreen tend to be too waxy and you don't get much colour from them. The spring leaves are the best. So yeah, just going out, getting some leaves and literally hammering that colour onto your piece of wood. So I'll show you that one after. So you've got the bark, the leaves, and the oak galls. So I'm going to show you with the oak galls how I get the colour out of that to make a really lovely black stain or ink. The word ink comes from encre, which means to burn. So the tannic acid literally burns and kind of reacts with the substrate. So traditionally we would have been writing on vellum or on parchment, so goat or calf skin, and that bit of galactanic acid will react with that skin and give a really, really permanent colour, permanent bond that outlasts the substrate really. It never disappears, it'll actually eat through it eventually. So I'm going to start off, I have 3 oak galls in there, and the first thing to do is crush them. So I've got a little spice grinder here that I use. It doesn't have to be really fine, you're just sort of breaking it up so that you've got as much contact with that material as possible. That's then going to go into a little saucepan. And I'm just going to heat it up.
Did you have water in that saucepan, Kath?
Yes, sorry, I already had some more. There's already some water in there. So I'm just going to heat that up a little bit and give it a stir. Take it off a minute. It's sort of a bit repellent initially, but keep stirring it and it doesn't dissolve, but you'll have a suspension of it in some water. So I'm going to put that on to heat up again on my little, if I get to work, induction stove, which is revolutionary. I can like boil things in 30 seconds and make things so much quicker than I used to be able to. It's fab.
And just on that note, Kath, how is it to get into what you're doing? Is it expensive? Do you need a lot of high-tech equipment, or is it something that most people have at home?
You don't need anything. The nicest way to make inks and stuff is over a fire outside. So maybe a couple of stainless steel bowls, but just old saucepans, you know, they don't even need to have handles and things. Just get some scrap saucepans, people that don't want them, or charity shops. I buy these little thali dishes from my local Indian on Penarth Road. I think they're like, they're £1 each or something like that. So I use those a lot, and they work on the induction stove as well. But no, just out on a fire. Stainless steel pot is the best because that's then not reacting with things. But you might want to use a reaction. So you might want to use a copper pot or an iron pot, and that pot will then have an influence on the colour that's in it. So you can actually use that to advantage. But if you want it to be clean, then use a stainless steel pot. This is bamboo that I collect from the woodland next to where I live. And I use that for pens, stirring sticks, all sorts of things. So that's free. The oak galls are free. Whoop.
Oh, yeah.
Spoiling it. Yeah. The iron is free. And then all the paper and stuff, fabric is all secondhand, so you need no money at all. So that's just boiled, you can see, just for not for very long. And I don't know if you can sort of see without me tipping it. I'll dip some paper in it in a minute, but there's already a colour there.
Yeah.
I'll show you. quickly. So just within that short space of time, it's already got quite a lot of colour on there. So I would normally leave that for an hour or so and possibly even leave it overnight to get as much colour as possible from it. But because we're doing things quickly today, I'm going to move on. So this is my little Chinese teapot, which has got a strainer. So that's going to go into there. You can use a tea strainer. You can use a piece of muslin, bit of old cloth, a stocking, you know, whatever you've got that can strain things, but still allow the colour and the water to come through. So that's gradually dripping out. What I'm going to show you now is the reaction that you get with iron from that. So I need to tip that into there in a minute because I don't want that. I want to show it to you in the saucer because you see it really nicely. Oh, actually, I can show you on some paper first. So I'm just going to put a little bit more on there. Spread it out. So if I put some iron on there, just wash my brush. So this is my iron water, which is, as I said, you can actually buy it as you can buy ferrous sulfate as a powder. So that's powdered iron sulfate, and you can add that to water, or you can use it as it is. So if I just drop a couple of pieces onto there, if you wait just a second. Can you see there's those little, oh God, I keep going to the wrong side. That's like the little specks that you're getting on your wood. Yeah. And I'm just going to put a bit more colour on there.
Were they blue?
Yeah, they're kind of black, bluey, sort of a bluey black colour. And if I add some of the liquid, I'll just drop some liquid onto it. You can see the instant
that's very vivid
reaction that the iron gives you. So that's essentially getting a brown or a black ink. But what I do just to add to that and to preserve it a little bit is, let's pull that out of there. So I would take that and reduce it down further. So I put it back on my stove and basically reduce it down by about at least a half. So get rid of half of the water that's in there so you get a much more concentrated colour. The other thing I do is I add some salt, a little bit of salt to it, just a preservative. And then I also add what's called gum arabic. So that's liquid gum arabic. Gum arabic comes from Central Africa, comes from the acacia plant. An amazing history to it. It was one of the bargaining tools in the slave trade. It's apparently, God, I was going to say Obama then. The other one, Osama bin Laden, sorry. Apparently owned a huge plantation, or I don't know if you call it plantation, huge crop of this. And when the Americans wanted to put sanctions on prior to the war, Iraq War, they were told if they did that, they'd no longer have any gum arabic. Gum arabic is a major ingredient of Coca-Cola. So those sanctions never happened because America wouldn't have been able to make its Coca-Cola.
Wow.
So, yeah, gum arabic is an interesting little thing. So I use it.
Politics even comes into
huge politics in lots of these ingredients. You know, textiles was one of the first things that was being transported by slave trips, and also indigo and cotton were produced by the slave trade in America, and that's where the blues comes from, because cotton picking was really hideous, horrible work, and the indigo dyeing was also horrible work, and these were the songs that were sung when they were making denim. When the slaves were working on denim. So that's where blues, the idea of blues comes from, as well as it being mournful, obviously, and blue as a mood. So yeah, gum arabic I buy as a powder. What I want to do, and this is why I was so interested in agar last week, because I want to replace this from Africa with agar from West Wales, please. If anybody's out there and can do that for me.
Agar is from seaweed. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've had a little bit of a play around. There's certain seaweeds that you can leave soaking in water and you get a gelatinous kind of material from them. I also use honey sometimes to thicken things, but gum arabic is the traditional thickener. So it's in chewing gum, it's in Coca-Cola, loads of our foods have it. So it's not a harmful product, and it literally just thickens things slightly and gives it a slightly glossy, I can't get the lid off this. There we go. Gives it a slight glossiness, a nice flow. So when you're making ink, the feel of it and how it flows is sort of important. So that's just had a bit of salt and a bit of gum arabic added to it. And the other thing that I do sometimes is add some scent. So sometimes I put frankincense or rose oil or something like that into it, so it has a nice scent. Lavender, I sometimes use lavender, and I make my own rose water, just collecting rose petals and leaving them soak into water. So I make my own rose water, or you can put all sorts of different plants, chamomile, rose, lavender, mint, rosemary, any of those. You can put them into oils to make your own flavoured scented oils or waters that you can add to things. This one doesn't smell bad, actually. This one keeps and doesn't really go off. It separates a bit, you might have to shake it. But it doesn't smell bad. The walnut absolutely stinks, and no matter what I add to it, I can't get rid of the smell of it. It's I'm overflowing again. Yeah, walnut smells really bad. So that's the oat gall ink. Now I haven't left that for very long. Like I said, I would normally reduce that down by at least a half to get a stronger colour. I'm just going to show you quickly. Okay. So I've got the most rubbish brush here. I'm going to go and find another brush in a minute. So that's kind of natural as it is. But what I'm going to do is add a little bit of that iron, a little bit more of that iron to it. Oh, let me show you that now. Look what that's done now.
Yes.
Great, isn't it?
Yeah.
So add a little bit more.
I can see what you're saying. Time seems to be a big part of this as well.
What does? Iron.
Time, so allowing things to settle and
it's getting that first bit of colour is quite quick, but to get strength of colour and to see how things are going to react, it's not a super fast process. Yeah. So, but that's pretty nice actually. So that's just a, not exciting, just a black ink, but it's a beautiful black ink when you actually see it on substrate, and it's not going to disappear. It's not going to fade. That will last as long as the Mappa Mundi lasts. I'd probably reduce that down by half, but there's no bits in it. It's and it works nicely. So I favour, this is a manga dip pen. So I didn't know, but manga comics are drawn with dip pens. I didn't realise. So that's a manga pen, and then that's just a bamboo with an old nib in it that I quite like. Can you see how rusty that is?
Yeah,
I'm
looks well used.
I don't wash my brushes or my pens, but the manga pen is stainless steel, so I can do what I like with it and not worry about washing it. So I'm just going to write on here for you. Try and get this to work. Right, it's not working at the moment. Hang on, that's better. Oh, why is it working on there? It must be the angle of my arm. That's weird. Hang on, let me come over here. Why is that not working? It can't be because I'm washed in, it's blocked up. Right, I'm going to go for this one instead. I've never had a pen fail on me before. That's better.
Yeah.
I shall hold that up. Now let's do it on here. This.
I like the sound of that as well, Kath.
There we go. So it's really nice for drawing with, for using a dip pen, for writing. Try writing. I wrote my dissertation with this. 10,000. Yeah.
Wow.
It makes you think more before you write, and you're putting things down They're kind of more permanent, and it's just a really nice feeling. Kids absolutely adore. They don't know what this is really. First of all, you know, you've got to kind of show them how to use it, and it's a very physical act, writing with it. So that's the oat gall. Is there any?
What you've just shown us there, Kath, is such a reaction to what's the technical age that we're in at the moment. So yeah, we're all looking at our laptops right now, and I've got my phone here. Yeah. We're typing away. You know, occasionally I use a pencil and a piece of paper, but you understand where everything came from, and there's an appreciation of that, and also the process that you're going through as well.
When you look at old documents and you've had a go at this, and you think, how many people and how long? I've just finished reading the Hilary Mantel, and I also read other historical fiction, and in that they talk a lot, you know, how many monks there would have been to write one Bible, you know, one page. I don't know if anybody saw, BBC did a programme recently on writing, and I can't remember what the time scale was, but I think they had a calligrapher on it. I think he thought he could do 4 pages a day, maybe, or something. So when you think about the Reformation and the Bibles and things that were prior to print press, how long that took to do things like that, it's full appreciation for it. So have a go, and you can use a stick, you can use a feather. You don't need to have a fancy dip pen. Don't put it in a fountain pen because it will wreck it. And don't put this in your printer. Can I just show you that logwood now?
Wow.
Isn't that just
nice, isn't it?
That's gorgeous, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's just
watercolor. Where it meets.
Yeah, that's the bit I like, the kind of liminal space between the different substrates, that you get these odd little things happening. I'll show you some other bits of work. So that's kind of what I do, is do these ink tests, and so I sell those framed up, these sort of little sample pieces, and I write what they've been done with, so you've got the ingredients on there. So that's kind of my work. Simple as that, 6 seconds. Is there any questions about the oat gall before I go on and talk about the walnuts?
Yeah, if anybody wants to put that up on the chat, or I can unmute you.
I'm going to show you a couple of, while we wait, just to see if there's anybody got any questions. So I'm such a messy worker. It's kind of intuitive. See what happens. That's kind of my recipes. You'll very rarely get a recipe out of me. It's just like suck it and see how many you need to put in, see what colour you get. But that's kind of how I keep my recipes. So I add little bits as I go along, and I change it every time I do it. But to make to make 100 ml of ink, I basically go with 1 oat gall per 10 ml. So to make 200 ml, I will put 20 oat galls in, but I then reduce that down to 100 ml. So 100 ml bottle, and then I will then split that into 20 mils to sell it. So I'll make 5 bottles from 20 oat galls. So there's approximately 4 oat galls in a bottle of ink that I sell. So it's quite concentrated. Yeah. That was showing the reaction last time. So you can see that's a bit deeper. I would have boiled that for a bit longer. So the basic gall colour at the bottom is much richer, much warmer.
That's almost mustard colour, that one, wasn't it?
Yeah, that one. I would have just let it soak for a bit longer, probably an hour before I strained it off. So that in itself is a really lovely colour. And then if you add that to other colours, it enriches them and deepens them and helps it be more permanent by having that added as well with some of the dyes. There's just some little samples. Ooh, what was that one? I can't remember what that one was, but quite nice, different little. So this is weld down the bottom here that I was talking about, the yellow colour. And just kind of, so again, this is all one dye here, which has got different reactions going on. And there's a bit of indigo at the bottom there.
Doing the oak gourds.
About 100 ml, or, you know, depend. I use Kilner jars a lot. So I'll maybe chuck 20 galls in there with 500 ml or something. Just the less water and the more galls, the stronger it'll be to a certain degree. One of these little jars, what did I put? Where's the one I've just done? So I crushed 4, didn't I? I think.
Yeah.
I've got so many jars going on now, I can't remember which is which. Oh, it's in here. It's in here. So I crushed 4 and put it into this. So that's probably 100 ml of water in there. These little measuring, they're cups, measuring cups. I think you can get them in Tesco or somewhere.
Right.
So they're quite useful because you've actually got the measurements on the side. In fact, I can tell you how big that is, not just a cup. 118 ml. Yeah, I was right. So I put about 100 ml with 4 oat galls, and that gives you quite a nice depth of colour. I would probably then boil that down to 50 ml. So you double it up after you've strained it. So you get twice the strength. Yeah. Is that okay?
If you put too much water in there,
yeah, you don't want too much.
You can always reduce it down.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just it doesn't really matter if it's really weak. Just boil it, or put it on a fire until it. And you know, if you've got a wood burning stove, leave the pot on top of the stove. By the next morning, it'll be, you know, it'll be hot. And if it dries out completely, just add a bit more water back to it. It doesn't matter, unless it's burned. But you know, it doesn't matter if it dries out. You can just add more water to it. So yeah, I think if you can find 4, which you should be able to do without too much problem at the moment, especially if you go up to what's the cemetery on the side of the hill in Merthyr, at the top of Merthyr, the cemetery where the bodies are meant to come out at one point. You know, the one on, if you're going out the other end.
I know where it is. I don't know the name.
That cemetery where the where the start of the railway, the mountain railway, there. I know I didn't tell you all that, okay, because that's a secret. But if you cross the other side of the mountain railway, there's a little cluster of oak trees just before you go into the cemetery, and they tend to have loads on them. Okay. So get 4 or just get 4 or 5, and that'll do your first little batch.
Just looking at time here, Kath.
Yeah,
What's there was another dye you were going to show us.
Yes, so the next one I'm going to show you is walnut. Just to give myself a clear space. So these have all been dyed with walnut. That's old recycled wool, which you can see has been eaten by a moth actually on the one side. So that's recycled wool that's been dyed with walnut. That's a piece of paper that has walnut ink on it. And it gives a really beautiful rich brown, particularly on wool and silk. I just want to show you, this. So this gives you an idea of how the fabrics can influence the type of colours you get, and how the different woods would influence it as well. So you've got cotton and linen down this end, which is much tougher fibre, and then you come down to wool and silk, which protein fibres, they dye much more easily. And that was why, again, being a bit geeky last week with the mycelium, I was asking what it's made of in terms of its constituents. Is it cellulose or protein? Because those two things react really differently with dyes. You can see the difference with that there. And then you've got the eco print, which is the direct kind of steamed print from the leaves. And then you've got a little bit of the ink that I've made on the end there. Right down there. You probably won't get hugely different because you're still dealing with cellulose fibres, which might have a bit of tannic acid in them if they're that type of tree. So I guess that's the main difference, is what the acid content would be. So if you were, think of it, name me a tree that is low in acid that doesn't have nuts. Lime maybe, or
maybe lime.
So the difference between that. I lost that then.
Oh, sorry, you just froze there, Kath. Maybe beech.
Yeah, so no, beech nuts make a good dye. So they probably have tannin, quite a reasonable amount of tannin. So hazel, beech, oak, cherry, chestnut, walnut, all those are going to have quite high tannin content. So I guess maybe things like sycamore, lime, elm, maybe would be lower. So there'll be a subtle difference, but because they are all cellulose, it won't be the difference like you get between silk and cotton. for instance, which are completely different, made up of completely different substance. Yeah.
What about softwoods? So you've dealt with hardwoods there. Softwoods, have you tried?
I haven't. No, I don't think I've had a piece of pine, or what are other softwoods? Larch.
Yeah, pine, spruce.
Spruce, larch. Yeah, I haven't, but I think they would react like paper. I think they'd, so you'd probably get, well, paler, but it's paler wood anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
But because it doesn't have that tannic acid, I think you'd have less of a reaction with them. So it might, yeah, less strength with some of the colours. But you can add things, so you can add the acid to it. So you can add some of the tannic acid before you put it onto those woods, so it reacts and sticks to it in the same way as it would something that is more acidic. So more tests needed, definitely, on loads of on different types of wood. Right, I'm going to show you the walnut quickly. So these little things, quite big things, I suppose, have a huge amount of colour in them. And with any nut, it's the hull that you need. So sometimes these, because they're a little bit frozen still, so they're a bit harder to get off. And it's really messy. But what I want you to see is the colour change in this very, very rapidly. So you can see pale green, pretty pale limey green. And already, can you see my fingers are going a nice nicotine yellowy brown. So as soon as the air hits it, so oxygen has a big part to play. So as soon as things oxidize, the air hits it, that will start to change color. I'm going to leave that right just there. Can you see it? Oh, you can nearly see it.
Yeah, right? I see the top. Yeah.
By the time we finish, that will have changed color. Okay. So I do that with a couple of walnuts. I'm just going to get a little bit more from this one. My fingers will now be nicotine brown for a week, probably. So this is where I do sometimes wear gloves at this bit, because it is particularly strong. It's an amazingly strong colour, and it reacts best with protein. And we're made of protein, so our skin is protein. So it's used as a hair dye. It smells quite nice in this state, but when you make it, when you leave it, it smells really vile. But there's your initial. That's what you get from it straight away without adding anything to it. Wipe my hands a minute. So I'm just going to show you quickly on here. Get a better brush. I meant to put some more brushes out. I've got like a household brush or the tiniest little brush. That'll do. So you can play with that straight away. It's not that strong, but there is quite a bit of colour there. And as that oxidizes on the paper, that's going to get stronger. So what I would do with these to get more colour out, add a bit of boiling water to them. That was probably about 200 ml. Like I say, I tend not to measure things. I just kind of see what size container I've got. So I would then mush that up a bit and boil it. So I'm just going to let that steep and boil. Can you see how strong it is now?
Yeah.
Loads of colour out.
Yeah, definitely changing colour.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this is starting to go as well. So I would boil that up. Again, I would probably leave that overnight and then strain it, and that's your dye. That's as simple as that. You don't need to add any chemicals, anything to it. Again, it's because it's got juglans in it. That's the chemical that's in it that changes colour. Once that's soaked, I'll just give it 5 or 10 minutes. I'm going to strain that and then put a couple of little bits of cloth and paper in there. And we'll also, so that would be quite a good way of staining a softwood to get it a richer, deeper colour. And you can just paint it on like that. What I've also done here, that's walnuts again, but they've been soaking in alcohol. Nice. So you can make colours either with water or with alcohol. If you make them with alcohol, you often get stronger, brighter colours, but you just have to bear in mind that they're not water soluble. So anything, if you clean up, if you're thickening them, then you need to use something like shellac. So you'd use an oil-based thickener, and then obviously cleaning up and stuff is a little bit more problematic. So I'm just going to paint a little bit of that on for you, onto this timber and onto the wood, so you can see the difference. So that's the colour after they've been sitting, soaking in alcohol for a little while. And I don't know if you can't really see it happening, but the alcohol onto paper, it reacts quite differently to water. It evaporates really quickly. And you could be putting that straight on to the wood. I'm just thinking it depends how much you're putting on and how dry the timber is and what you're doing with it after, because the water-based, you're not soaking it, it's not going right through, you're not leaving it sitting in it. But yeah, it could open up the grain a little more if you're applying the water-based. So I think alcohol-based is probably would be better for sort of finer pieces of work. And you could also make that into a varnish, so you could add that to shellac. So if you make an alcohol-based colour, so thinking about Rhif the other day and some of the things that you might be more likely to do, I think they'll just work better with some of the other products that you use. So for colouring, I don't know about resin, because that would probably be water-based, but I'm not actually sure.
Yeah,
so I need to work with Rich about whether it needs to be water-based or alcohol-based to add to resin. But adding it to varnishes and shellac, then it make an alcohol-based one. And it's the same process, just chopping the material up fine, soaking it in. I tend to use ether alcohol, which is plant-based. Isopropyl alcohol is mineral oil-based. So ether alcohol, soak your material in it, in a pot, leave it, and just keep testing it and see what you're getting from it. So that's been in.
I was going to ask you what alcohol use, yeah.
Yeah, so ethyl.
Does gin work?
Hmm? Oh, vodka's
Does
fine.
gin work?
Yeah, vodka.
Yeah.
Don't use the gin. Use cheap vodka, okay? So that's, yeah, quite a considerable.
With a cheeky little glass on the side.
That's gone on there really nicely onto that piece of beech. So it kind of looks like a piece of wool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's boiled for long enough for now, just for us. I don't really need to show you much more of that really, but essentially you've got a good amount of colour in there. I would put that through a piece of muslin, strain it, and then you've got your dye liquid, which you can keep for quite a while actually. You can just keep it in a Kilner jar. I often drop things into the jar, so you can do what's called solar dyeing, where you just put your material into the pot of colour, leave it on a windowsill for a week or so, and just the warmth of the sunlight and it being in that jar, that's enough of the reaction, enough heat. So rather than having to constantly heat things, because if you're dyeing big bits of cloth, you'll sometimes be leaving them for an hour or so, leaving them overnight and standing, waiting. So for testing and things, it's nicer actually just to pop them into a jar of colour that you've made and leave them on a windowsill and come back a week later and take it out and see what it's done. You can also use your compost bin, compost heap. So there's quite an amount of heat generated within the compost. So you can take your wrapped up piece of cloth, your piece of wood that you've wrapped with iron, and wrap it in a piece of cloth, shove it in the compost heap, and the warmth and the moisture of the compost heap will do its job, and you can kind of just forget about it and not waste any energy on it. That's quite a nice way of doing things. Social media or anything, if you've got any other questions, or if you do anything, post on there and show me.